Oh my gosh, I forgot I had a microphone. I'm
There you go.
talking to myself.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to This Or Truth. My name is Max Sertus. Today I'm joined with my co-host, Ava Hanley. Ava, today you and I are going to be breaking down a new March Madness segment on the show. For those of you who don't know, the March Madness is a ginormous college basketball competition across the country, and right now we're entering the Sweet 16. So Ava and I are going to recap for you everything you need to know before this next round. So Ava, what conference are we starting off with today?
We're going to start in the Southern Conference. First game that we're going to cover is University of Michigan versus UC San Diego.
All right, let's get right into it.
In this conference, we had 4 standout teams. Auburn ranked number 1, Texas A&M ranked number 4, Iowa State ranked 3rd, and Michigan State ranked 2nd. However, we're going to start with the University of Michigan game right here. University of Michigan was leading pretty much the whole first half, and at halftime, they had a score of 42-27. But this didn't last very long because UC San Diego ended up climbing 34 points while holding University of Michigan in just those first 4 minutes of the second half. It looked like UC San Diego was going to come back because of this score increase, but then Michigan tied it back up at 63 points with just 2 minutes and 30 seconds left of the game. It looked like UC San Diego was going to come back, and they ended up actually getting the lead. But then Donaldson from the University of Michigan ended up scoring a 3-pointer to put Michigan back on top, and it got them the win.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, now moving on to the Western Conference. The Western Conference consisted of a couple standout teams. You had Florida, you had UConn, St. John's, Kansas, Texas Tech, all big names, but a game I want to focus on was the Arkansas upset. Arkansas, who was number 10, upset Kansas, the Jayhawks, number 7. This was the second time in the last 3 years that the Razorbacks were able to beat Kansas, and John Capillari wins his first NCAA tournament game with Arkansas. He was previously the coach of the University of Kentucky Wildcats, and he was the former coach for Kentucky from 2009 to 2024 until getting this new job, and he had a pretty successful game, having a major upset. They had a 77-66 win, and freshman Billy Richmond III led with 16 points and 4 rebounds with an additional 15 points from Carter Knox. It was an insane game. It was a big bracket breaker, and that was definitely a standout. All right, St. John's, another big game everybody was looking forward to. St. John's was able to crush Omaha in the first round, who was ranked number 15. St. John's being number 2, won 83-53, but the big upset came by Arkansas in the second round of the tournament, where they were able to beat St. John's and Rick Pitino 75-66. Now, why is this so important? Well, let's talk about the social media hype behind Rick Pitino. This guy was, a lot of people were comparing him to a mafia boss, a lot of Italian-American energy, a lot of very stone-cold coaching methods, and that's kind of what he's known for. And Rick Pitino was in his second year as a coach for St. John's. They were the Big East regular season and conference title champions, but they couldn't get it done against the Razorbacks, which is why this is such an interesting story. Then we want to move up the bracket a little bit to the reigning champs. UConn was a big name in this tournament because they were the reigning champs last year, but this year they're only ranked number 8. They were able to beat their opponent Oklahoma in the first round, and then they moved on to advance to face the number 1 seed, Florida, who they could unfortunately not get the win against. Florida was able to win 77-75, and now Florida will go face Maryland. Florida will go on to face Maryland, who is the number 4 seed, who had a very exciting weekend after facing Colorado State, and they won that game 72-71, where Maryland's Derek Queen hit a fadeaway jumper to advance to the Sweet 16. This is the first time they're going to that part of the tournament since 2016, and now the Western Conference will stand at Florida versus Maryland and Arkansas versus Texas Tech.
For the Eastern Conference, everything was pretty uneventful in the first round. Every single higher-ranked team, with the exception of Baylor, was able to pull out a win. The Vanderbilt-St. Mary's game was very fun to watch because the score was really close down to the wire, but eventually St. Mary's did pull out the win. Jumping over to the BYU-Wisconsin game, this was one of the biggest upsets we've seen so far. Wisconsin, previously ranked 3rd, was beat out by BYU. The BYU-Wisconsin game was one of the most eventful in the second round due to the big upset that occurred. Wisconsin, previously ranked 3rd, was shut down by BYU, especially because the Wisconsin offense was really lacking in the first half. They were able to pull it together. They were down 11 with just under 2 minutes left, and they were able to make a pretty big comeback, but in the end, it wasn't enough. The other notable game in the Eastern Conference was Arizona versus Oregon. Arizona was killing it on the offensive rebounds, and even though Oregon had an early lead, it just wasn't enough for them to pull out the win, making Arizona the third team to move on to the Sweet 16.
All right, now moving on to the Midwestern Conference. Now, for the most part, the seed was a little uneventful. Most of the top seeds were able to remain dominant and move on to the second round. However, a big upset that I want to focus on is the McNeese-Clemson game. Now, McNeese has lots of social media hype due to their team manager. His name is Amir Khan. This guy's gone viral over the internet. He gets a big boombox every game, and he comes out and he gets the team hype, and it's become an absolute tradition for McNeese. Now, the Cowboys had an insane win over Clemson, winning 69-67, and this is the first time that McNeese has won a tournament victory, so it's an absolutely historic moment in their program. They were able to win 69-67 and sent the Tigers home early. McNeese coach Will Wade kind of had a bittersweet moment because although it is the first time that they are winning an NCAA tournament game, he is also going to be in his last year of coaching for the Cowboys because he is moving on to NC State. Senior Christian Shoemate had 13 points and 11 rebounds, and it was really kind of clear that they were more offensively dominant than the Tigers. The Tigers also weren't able to tie it together on the offensive side of the ball, only shooting 20.8% in the first half. Now, that being said, the only other notable game I would point out from this round would be the High Point versus Purdue game. Not exactly because of the gameplay that went on, but I did have the pleasure of going to Providence at the Duncan Center to see some of these games, and I was able to catch the High Point versus Purdue game. And High Point did have a very strong first half. They were keeping on with the Purdue Boilermakers, and they were able to get a big student section there, which was great to see. They had a whole student section fly out, so it was an exciting game for sure. But Purdue was able to just shut them out in the second half. Braden Smith, number 3, was an overlooked point guard. He didn't have a lot of recruits, and now he's the star of the Boilermakers, and he is a future All-American. So the final standings in the Midwestern Conference remain Houston versus Purdue and Kentucky versus Tennessee. All right, so that's our recap for the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament. As of right now, the games in the Sweet 16 for the South Conference are Auburn versus Michigan and Ole Miss versus Michigan State. Should be very interesting. Ava, what are your insights on these games coming up?
Auburn has had a really great run the first 2 rounds, and I really think they're gonna dominate this next game against Michigan. That being said, I've been to a Michigan versus Michigan State game, and the energy is absolutely wild. So if we could get both Michigan teams to the Elite 8, that would be so fun to watch, especially with, you know, the home state rivalry. In terms of this game down here with Ole Miss and Michigan State, Ole Miss has had a great run too, with the win against North Carolina and the upset against Iowa State. So they are definitely capable of pulling out a win, but I'm going to go Michigan State on the bottom and Auburn on the top.
Interesting. I might have to take devil's advocate. I've seen the Rebels put together some interesting plays against originally UNC, but we'll see what happens. So that's our standings. Now moving on to the Eastern Conference, we have Duke versus Arizona and BYU versus Alabama. Now, Ava, I think personally for me here, I think Duke, they have a historic program. Cooper Flagg, one of the most top sought after recruits in the nation for the NBA. I've given the Blue Devils the win on this one. But down here, BYU versus Alabama, I'm not entirely sure how it will go. Now, I really don't know if Alabama can put it together against BYU because they are on a hot streak right now, and offensively they look a lot better. But what are your insights to this?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think BYU is on a really great run right now, and I would love to see that energy come out into this game against Alabama. I think they're totally capable of winning that game. In terms of Duke, I agree with you 100%. They have a healthy roster. Cooper Flagg is back, like you said. So
yes.
I think I'm going to have to go Duke and BYU.
All right, now let's move on to the Western versus Midwestern Conference.
All right, Max, looking at the Western Conference, Florida has kept their reign as the #1 seed in this entire tournament, but Arkansas has had upset after upset, beating not only the #7 ranked team, but the #2 ranked team. So what do you think is going to happen in the Sweet 16 round?
Well, I 100% agree with you. When you talk about Arkansas, the Razorbacks have proven that they are more than a 10 seed. They have more value than that. So against Texas Tech, I think it'll be a lot more even of a game than people think. On the other hand, the Florida versus Maryland game, Maryland had a great game against Colorado State, hitting that fadeaway jumper in the last couple seconds of the game to take it home. But once again, that was against #12 Colorado State. That game should have been a lot less close than it was. And against the #1 seed Florida, I just don't think Maryland has what it takes. So I'm going to take Florida and for the top. And I don't know about Texas Tech versus Arkansas, but right now I think I'll stay with the safe bet and say Tech. So that being said, moving on to the Midwestern Conference, what do we got?
Well, I mean, we've got pretty standard 1 through 4 ranks here. It's going to be close games all around. I would love to see Purdue pull out a win here, but their schedule has been a lot easier than Houston. I mean, Houston's schedule has been a lot easier than Purdue's, and they're the number 1 ranked seed. So Purdue's definitely going to have to put in the work here, but it's generally all things are possible. It's March Madness.
Right, I totally agree where you talk about the Midwestern Conference having a bit more of an easier ranking. When you go through all 4 conferences, typically the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference have been ranked most difficult, but I do agree the Boilermakers versus Houston will be an interesting game. The Boilermakers are ranked number 4, but there's a lot of culture within that program. And of course the Wildcats versus number 2 Tennessee. The Wildcats have always been a historically good program as well. So if culture can beat playmaking, then I think I'm going to have to go with Wildcats and Boilermakers, but it's been a very close, it's going to be a very close game to call. So I think that concludes our rounds 1 and 2 recap for March Madness. So that's where we stand. My name is Max Sertus.
I'm Ava Hanley.
This has been the Sir Truth Recap. We will see you guys in the Elite 8.